Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
To the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder, and I really am excited to have you guys back on the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in to the program. Today's going to be a great show. We're going to talk about the New York Knicks. We're going to talk about Steph Curry's great stretch, the issues surrounding the Portland Trailblazers, as well as my top 5 draft prospects for the NBA draft coming up in June. So this is going to be a really exciting show. But to start off with this show today, we're going to break down my New York Knicks. Yes, I'm a huge Knicks fan, and it's because I'm from New Jersey, and I adore the Knicks. But unfortunately, it's been a long, long time since they've been good, right? They haven't been good since 2013, and they really weren't that good up until that point. And they finally have turned it around under coach Tom Thibodeau. They have won 9 straight, which is currently the longest winning streak in the NBA. And I'm recording this on Saturday, but they beat Toronto today 120-103. And the score at halftime was 64-59. So think about that, right? Toronto didn't even crack over 50 points in the second half. And that's a credit to the Knicks defense, right? The Toronto scored 44 points in the second half. The Knicks just keep rolling. They keep rolling, right? And they're a 4th seed right now in the Eastern Conference. Julius Randle had another incredible game. He had 31 points and 10 rebounds on 10 of 17 from the floor. RJ Barrett had 25 points. Derrick Rose had another great game with 19. Reggie Bullock had 16. Nerlens Noel had 4 blocks. Obi Toppin and Taj Gibson had 9 points apiece off the bench. And Emmanuel quickly had 6 points. But I think some cool things, too, is that the Raptors shot only 43.4% from the floor. And this was a game the Knicks had to win and did win, right? They're winning the games they're supposed to win. And they're beating teams that, like Atlanta the other day in overtime, that a lot of people didn't necessarily see them beating either. And the Knicks are getting hot at the right time. But with some interesting stats before I get into why I think the Knicks have been so successful, just for you guys to contemplate, because I think these stats are interesting for people to know. From 3-point range, it went up today, but going into today's game against Toronto, they were 42% from 3 in April. So the crazy thing about that is that they were 42% in April, right? That's the second best in the NBA behind the Los Angeles Clippers. And for context, the Los Angeles Clippers are the best 3-point shooting team in the NBA. So what's interesting about that is that the Knicks are a team that has not historically been has not recently been a very good 3-point shooting team. But this year they've turned that around. And what's interesting about that from my point of view is that you look at the Knicks, right? The Knicks right now are 5th in 3-point shooting percentage in the NBA, behind teams like the Clippers, the Bucks, the Jazz, and the Brooklyn Nets. That's not bad company to be behind. But also what's interesting about them too is that they have going into today's game, which the net efficiency is only going to go up from today's game. They had the best net efficiency in April. And what's great about that is they had the second best net efficiency. And the reason why that's great is because they're able to, play great defense, like everyone acknowledges that, but they're starting to pick up the offense a little bit. And that's allowed them to be able to be a better team than they have been in the past. Also, Julius Randle is having a lot more opportunities to shine. He has way more touches than he did last season. He's averaging over 84 touches a game at 84.5. And it's contributed to better play because he's making smarter decisions. And it's allowed the Knicks to really flourish and get these 9 straight wins and get to the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. I think Tom Thibodeau's coach of the year. I really do. And I think that's, and the reason why I say that is because he's built a team that was a laughingstock in the NBA, a team that has had the worst record out of any franchise in the last 20 years. And they're the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, right? I think he should be coach of the year. I talked about this when I did my coach of the year candidates a couple of shows ago, probably a little while ago. Tom Thibodeau should be the coach of the year candidate. It's without question he should definitely be it because he has turned this team around. It's not like Phoenix, who was like emerging on a high trajectory. The Knicks were not emerging on a high trajectory, and now they're the 4th seed in the East. And that might be a little bias coming in as a Knicks fan, but you have to acknowledge that Tom Thibodeau should be in that conversation, and I think he should be the coach of the year. But let's break down why the Knicks have been so successful, because I think this is where I think people are starting to, understand, or maybe haven't quite understood, like why the Knicks have been so good this year, right? It's not because they are just having a marvelous run and, they have gotten lucky breaks here and there. Now, that happens at basketball. There have been games where they've definitely got that to occur. But from my point of view, I look at 4 to 5 different reasons why the Knicks are playing at such a high level. And the reason one is because of Julius Randle, right? Julius Randle is a first-time All-Star this year. He's especially been playing at an incredibly high level in the last 5 games, where he's been averaging 32.8 points a game in his last 5, where he also had games where he had 44 against the Dallas Mavericks and 40 points in this recent stretch when he played against the Atlanta Hawks. Today he had 31. So again, he's playing very consistent basketball. He's shooting a really high percentage from 3. He's dominating in the mid-range a little bit too with his step-backs and pull-ups. But also, again, he's getting in the post and he's using his size, his athleticism to make things happen. And for his season, the reason why he's an All-Star is you have to look at these statistics and they equate to winning, right? He's averaging almost 24 points a game at 23.9 points a game, 10.5 rebounds, and 6.1 assists. Think about that, guys, right? If you had those statistics and your team was winning, you would be considered a star at this moment in time. And Julius Randle has now gotten into that category of being considered an all-star as he was this season. And now he's a great chance to continue to build on that for years to come. The Knicks have finally found a guy who can potentially be a multiple-time all-star for years to come. But I think the interesting thing for people to also understand, too, is it's not just the fact that you put up great stats and that's the reason why the Knicks are winning games, right? Because Bradley Beal's been putting up great stats, and the Wizards are going to be the play-in game most likely because they're right now at the 10th seed in the East, but they haven't had a winning record this season. And they have him and Russell Westbrook and Rui Hachimura and Robin Lopez. That's a decent enough team to contend in the East, but Julius Randle's stats are more meaningful, I think, because what's been going on with him is that he's been able to make the right decisions and being able to make an overall impact on his teammates. And I think the big thing, too, is that it's Tom Thibodeau, which I'll get into why he's been so good in a second. But I think the reason why Julius Randle has been so good this year is because he's making the right decisions. When he gets double teams, which has been happening a lot in the second half of the season, as they've been playing stiffer competition, he's been able to pass out to open shooters, get them open looks, because, again, he's penetrating and attracting a lot of defenders. That's where you always have to kick it out to an open shooter. In the past, he would try to dribble through that or spin his way through that, causing a lot of turnovers and empty possessions for the New York Knicks. But this year, he's not doing that. This year, he's deciding, okay, I can be better than that, so I'm going to kick out to these shooters and get them open shots. And again, his points are way up from last year. Well, they're up almost 5 from last year. He was 19.5 last year, which is, he's always been a very good player, but he's always been considered kind of a third or fourth kind of role player, good scorer to like a 1 or 2 option star talent guy for a team. And that notion has been dispelled now. And the reason why is because he's averaging 23.9, 10.5 rebounds, and 6.1 assists. He gets his teammates better. He's a great rebounder, and he's become an efficient level scorer. And he's also, his turnovers are way down from last year. Even though they're at 3.5 turnovers this year, they are better than they were last year. And he also has the ball in his hands a lot more this year, too. creating plays off the dribble, bringing the ball up the court, really showing his versatility as a small forward, power forward in this league. So he's doing an incredible job there. I think also another thing for people to understand too is he was a career three-point percentage guy of 34.9, right? Which is a little bit below average. It's okay, but it's not incredible, right? It's about average for a three-point shooter, right? It might be even a little below average now in today's NBA, the way the guys shoot the three. But he started working. He's been always working with this trainer, Tyler Ralph, who's one of the best trainers in the business, and he's an NBA trainer and very good, based out of Dallas, Texas. And that's where Julius Randle's from. And what they worked out 3 times a day in the summer, right? Lifting and then skill work twice a day, where they really worked on shooting. And for a lot of people, that's why Julius Randle has seen a major uptick in his three-point shooting percentage, right? Because people are going to sit there and say, well, he's putting a lot of hours in. Of course, his three-point shooting percentage is going to go up. But it's not just that, right? I mean, that is definitely a big part of it. But I think the other thing that people are not really acknowledging, and I think need to acknowledge, is the fact that he actually spoke. ESPN mentioned this today. The fact that he's been doing more meditation and visualization efforts to help himself in terms of his mindset when he makes or misses shots. And that is really important, right? And meditation's been something that you see a lot of the top athletes like LeBron James, like a Tom Brady, even a Kyrie Irving's been doing a lot more meditation, stuff like that too, because what it does, it clears the mind, it gets you more relaxed, it helps you put things in perspective. And the thing is, that's something that's helped Julius Randle out. He doesn't get bothered by missing shots anymore, or not nearly as much, because he understands the work he put in, and he has more of a positive mind frame when he goes into taking shots, and even difficult shots. And that's why he's seen a major uptick. Yes, he's put in the work, but he's also now developed the positivity and the confidence to get to that next step in his game. And it's because of the work he put in with Tyler Ralph, but it's also the work he put in with his meditation and his visualization efforts as well. So that's a big reason why he's been able to be so successful and why the Knicks have been able to be so successful. The second reason is Tom Thibodeau, right? Tom Thibodeau has really gotten this team to turn the corner, and Tom Thibodeau is a very successful coach, right? People are going to look at his Minnesota tenure and think that he wasn't a very successful coach, but if you look at Chicago, right? Chicago basically had Derrick Rose and Carlos Boozer and a bunch of role players. Sorry, Luol Deng's also. And they got the number 1 seed in 2011 in the Eastern Conference over the Big Three in Miami. And that was because he understands how to have guys buy in. He understands how to work around a major star and get the most out of their game. And he understands that the guys need to move the ball in offense and play incredibly good defense and tough defense. And that's why their team's been so good. It's because they have a toughness about them. It's because they have continuity on offense. And it's because the star player, Julius Randle, has gotten more opportunities to shine and has become a smarter player because Thibodeau is experienced enough to help him understand where he needs to be successful, where he can attack, and what is going to be happening. And then the player starts to become smarter. And the player starts to understand, okay, here's where I could be successful. And here's where the defense is going to collapse and everything like that. So Tom Thibodeau is definitely the second reason because I think he's the Coach of the Year candidate. I think he should be the Coach of the Year. Even though I think Monty Williams and Quinn Snyder have been excellent, I think that Tom Thibodeau has really turned around a team and a franchise that has been awful for a very long time. The third reason is Derrick Rose, right? And going to the continuity aspect of the Knicks under Tom Thibodeau, Derrick Rose is a guy who flourished under Thibodeau, and he's a guy, in Chicago, obviously, before the injury, but he also flourished under him a little bit in Minnesota as well. And Derrick Rose has obviously been through a lot, right? He's been on a lot of bad teams recently, but he also tore his ACL back in 2012 after having an MVP season where he was one of the best point guards in the league. And his athleticism is not quite the same as it once was, obviously, after an injury like that. But the one thing that he's done really well is he's gotten more skilled. He's gotten more patient with his game. But he's been a major piece off the bench. He's been that point guard scoring punch off the bench that the Knicks desperately need because Elfrid Payton's a good player, but Elfrid Payton is definitely more of a defensive guy and a guy that makes more of a difference in the defensive end. So when I look at that, I say that Derrick Rose is the third reason why the Knicks have been so good in this stretch, especially because he's averaging almost 19 points a game in his last 5, and to be exact, 18.8 points a game. He's averaging a little under 14 points in the year at 13.7. And what he's doing is, he brings scoring off the bench. And when your starters, especially Elfrid Payton, not being an elite level scorer or just being a above average level scorer, even though he's having a really good year for himself, he's a decent scorer, but he's not really an above average guy. Derrick Rose is above average when he has to be. But Derrick Rose also is a guy who comes in and his mindset's to score, right? And run the offense and get guys involved. But that's why the Knicks have been good, because they play fast with Derrick Rose. He gets a lot of points in the lane. He can hit. He's a three-point shot is dramatically improved over his career. And when you bring him and Emmanuel quickly off the bench, both of them can score in different ways, right? Derrick Rose likes to get downhill, floaters, layups, little mid-range jump shots. Emmanuel quickly likes to shoot a lot of threes and shoot them from distance. But Derrick Rose has been also a veteran that comes in. He knows how to win games. He knows what Tom Thibodeau expects. And having that guy off the bench, and especially the way he's been playing recently, is a big reason why the Knicks have turned the corner and won 9 straight recently. The fourth reason is R.J. Barrett, right? R.J. Barrett is a guy who was taken third in the 2019 NBA draft. He was in that same class with Zion Williamson. And a lot of people sat there and said, okay, R.J. Barrett was really good in college, but his rookie year is very disappointing. He only shot 32% from 3. He didn't show much of a right hand. He didn't seem to be as skilled as people thought. He didn't seem to be very efficient. All that stuff definitely played a big part into his lack of success. Even though he had a pretty good rookie season, I think, by statistically, guys were expecting more, right? They were expecting with what LaMelo Ball's doing or Anthony Edwards is doing. And it's sometimes hard to expect that right away, right? The New York market, the New York fans are a little bit higher demanding of players when they come out because of just New York being the mecca of basketball. And that's why I think that he got such criticism as a rookie. But he's turned that around. He's definitely turned that around. He has averaged 17.4 points a game this season. He's averaging 21.4 in his last 5, including a 25-point effort today against the Toronto Raptors, who, man, Toronto's had a real disappointing season. But we can talk about that a different day. But the big thing for R.J. Barrett, I think, are 2 things that have helped him and the team be successful. It's the fact that he's become a second legitimate offensive option, but the fact is that he's also a big 3-point shooting option now, and the fact that his driving game's improved, right? So he's almost 39% from 3, he's 38.6% from 3, and then he's also being able to attack more going both ways downhill and getting to the basket, right? And that's he has a better handle now. He has a better understanding of how to use his body against the NBA defenders. And it's allowing him to become a really successful player this year, right? And having a second guy who can average 17 points but can explode for 20 to 25 at a given moment is great. But I think the really unique and neat thing about R.J. Barrett is I think the fact that he's been able to stay patient and positive, like Julius Randle has, when he hasn't been playing well, right? He's had, so I'll give you 2 examples, right? And again, in the most recent games against Charlotte and Atlanta before they played Toronto today, he had horrible first halves, right? He was like 1 of 8 and 1 of 9 in both halves. But against Charlotte, he came out and had 21 of his 24 in the second half. And against Atlanta, he had over 15 in the second half as well. And both those games, they came back and won. And the reason why that is so unique and awesome is because a lot of young players, I know from your experience, from me playing basketball, when you miss a bunch of shots, you lose confidence, right? You lose confidence in yourself. You lose confidence in the work you put in. And at times, it doesn't seem like you're going to be able to gain that back and be successful. But what R.J. Barrett understood is that he needed to keep shooting, keep being aggressive. He put a lot of work in the offseason, right? He got his form changed by trainer Drew Hanlon, who's also a really good trainer as well. Trained guys like Joel Embiid and Jason Tatum and Zach LaVine and guys like that, right? So the interesting thing about it is that R.J. Barrett got that form change, but also he got more confident with his shot, so that when he was going through these stretches in the first half where he couldn't make shots, he knew he could stay confident and just keep shooting until he made one, right? And for a lot of young players, that's a struggle, right? Because you want to make your shots, you want to look good for your teammates and coaches when they give you the ball, and he's a guy that also dominated most of his career, right? He dominated at Montverde Academy. He dominated at Duke, and he's having a good season, right? So he's like, I shouldn't be struggling. But the interesting thing is he didn't take that to heart. He said, okay, I'm going to block that out, and I'm going to approach the second half very differently, and I'm going to attack it by shooting efficient shots, and I'm going to make them, right? And that's the reason why the Knicks have been really good, is because he stepped up his game to also being a guy that can be relied upon defensively at the end of the games. The last 5 games he's played, the 4 games leading up to today, he was averaging over 40 minutes a game. That went a little down because he didn't play as many minutes today because they blew out Toronto. But this is the important next step. As the Knicks play the Suns coming up soon, he's got to keep this up, right? Keep up the confidence, keep up the aggression. And if he continues to produce like this, the Knicks may have found the star in the draft and actually may look actually really good in the draft drafting him. Even though I think it was a legitimate 3rd pick based on how he played in college, a lot of people were questioning him. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be questioning as much anymore because he's playing at a really high level and doing a lot for the Knicks, especially recently. The last reason why the Knicks have been so successful in this 9-game run has been something they've been good at all year, and that's their defense, right? They have the 3rd best defense in the NBA, and they're the best in terms of opponents' field goal percentage, opponents' points per game, and 3-point percentage. So, look, they're not the best in terms of maybe rebounding, right? But they're top 5 in rebounding, right? And Nerlens Noel is averaging 2.2 blocks a game. But the interesting thing there is that the fact that they can get stops, right? And being able to get stops is so crucial when you get into playoff time. And that's why I think that they've been able to get on this run, because even though they've had stretches where teams have been able to score a lot of points, when they've had to lock teams down, they've been able to do it, right? Charlotte scored 66 points in the first half in that game recently at Madison Square Garden. They scored 31 second-half points. Atlanta, when they got to overtime, right, the game was tied at 121. The Knicks ended up winning that game, at 124. And again, the Knicks held them to single digits in that overtime and were able to take that advantage and win that game. Against Toronto, they held them to 44 points in the second half, and they were able to blow them out and win this game. That's the important thing there. And what this all means is that the Knicks are going to win a playoff series. I firmly believe that. I think if they play Atlanta or Boston, I think they're going to win those series. Now, Boston is definitely a more talented team, a more experienced team in the playoffs. But the reason why I think that if they played Atlanta, for example, the reason why I think the Knicks can definitely win a playoff series is for a few reasons. They're hot at the right time. They've won 9 straight games. They have a stifling defense, right? So in the playoffs, when the game slows down, you got to be able to defend and execute your defense. And offensively, they know how to move the ball. They know they already play a slower pace game anyway. So the thing is that they know how to defend and they know how to keep the game slower pace and be successful at that. They have Julius Randle, who's an all-star, and an emerging star in R.J. Barrett. They have good role players in Derrick Rose, Nerlens Noel, Taj Gibson, Emmanuel Quickley, Reggie Bullock, who had 16 points against Toronto today and has been playing great. Elfrid Payton. Again, they have it, and they have a good coach, right, who's been experienced in the playoffs and understands how to win. So I think those are the reasons why they can be successful. I think also from the Eastern Conference side, it looks like they're probably going to play Atlanta in the first round, and they've already beaten Atlanta. And I like their matchup against Atlanta because I think Atlanta is young and doesn't play great defense. Nate McMillan has gotten that team to play better defense and gotten to buy in more. But I think the problem with them ultimately is that they aren't a great defensive team, and they are young. So young guys ultimately do struggle in the playoffs based on history. And Boston's been inconsistent, right? Boston's the 6th seed right now. They have stretches where they win 6 in a row, and they have stretches where they lose to teams they shouldn't lose to. So I don't know what to think of Boston. They've had a lot of injuries, COVID pauses. I think they've underachieved, and I think they're gonna. If they play Milwaukee in the first round, I don't see them winning that series. If they play the Knicks, I think the Knicks have a great chance to beat them. I think the Knicks can beat them because the Knicks play better defense. I think the Knicks are more together, and I think the Knicks are playing better at the right time. And I think that ultimately goes down and helps the Knicks win. And I think the Knicks will win one playoff series as we get to playoff time, as the season stretches down to the playoff period. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to talk about Steph Curry's incredible stretch, as well as later on the show, we're going to talk about why Portland has not been able to really live up to expectations recently, and my top 5 NBA draft prospects. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about Steph Curry's incredible stretch. See you guys in a few minutes.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Michael Shredder. If you missed my last segment, I talked about my favorite team, the New York Knicks, and their incredible 9-game winning streak, and the fact that they're the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference, and why Tom Thibodeau should be Coach of the Year. Again, that they really are playing at a high level. Speaking of playing at a high level, though, Steph Curry. Unbelievable. So before I get into that, just a reminder that later on my show, I'm going to be talking about the Portland Trailblazers and their tough stretch recently, as well as my top 5 NBA draft prospects. That should be interesting, and I encourage you guys to listen to those segments as we get to them. But this segment's going to be about the high-level play of Steph Curry. Yes, Steph Curry has been playing out of his mind, right? I think this is the best stretch of his career. I think this may be the best season of his career in terms of production. Not necessarily in terms of his team winning, but I think he's playing at an absurdly high level and still showing that he is the best point guard in the league and a top 5 player in the league still. So we're going to start out just with the fact that on Friday he had 32 points against the Nuggets. He in a big win for them, and also the fact that he did also score 53 against them recently as well. So right now in this stretch he's 2-0 against the Denver Nuggets, which is pretty cool. But he's averaging on the season 31.2 points a game on 48.9% shooting and 42.5% from 3. He had 11 consecutive 30-point games, which is the most in NBA history, until his game against Washington, where he did not have that. In his last 13 games, he's averaged 37.7 points a game, including 53 against Denver, 49 against Philadelphia, and 47 in a loss at Boston. And in his 13-game stretch where he's getting hounded and double-teamed and blitz on ball screens, he's shooting 41% from 3. Now, I get it, right? He's the best shooter to ever play basketball. But he's not just shooting easily catch-and-shoot threes. He's getting double-teamed, triple-teamed, you name it, blitzed on ball screens, trapped on ball screens, and he's averaging these amount of points, and he's shooting that percentage from 3. When everyone knows he's the only guy that's really going to be able to score a lot of points on the Warriors, right? Andrew Wiggins is very inconsistent. Kelly Oubre is very inconsistent. Draymond Green's not a high-level scorer. And this is the interesting thing, right? He's just playing at a high level. And the crazy thing about it, too, is that the Warriors are 21st in offensive efficiency, even with his great play and the great ball movement that they have. So that's an interesting thing to look at, too. And what's also cool, too, is just to explain the impact. So the interesting thing is, before I get into maybe why he's the MVP and if he's, how dangerous the Warriors can be and all this kind of stuff, I'm just going to explain to you guys like some of his impact so you guys get an idea of how crazy this stretch has really been, because I think it's one of the best in NBA history, and I think people who follow basketball and listen to this podcast or just follow basketball generally should really appreciate how good this guy has been and what he's been able to do recently. So let's go right into it. The fact that 10 out of the 13 games in that stretch where he's been averaging almost 38 points a game, he's had a positive plus-minus, which is exceptional, right? And the reason why he's had that is because he's been able to generate a really high-level impact. Even games are losing, he's having a high-level impact, positive plus-minus, which means his team's winning when he's on the court. And the fact is, the Warriors are 30-30 right now. They're 9th in the West. Right now, they're going to be in the play-in spot. And they have a great chance to make the playoffs, obviously, with his level of play. The thing is also is that what's helping the Warriors out a little bit is that they have a very strong defense. They're 7th in the NBA in defensive rating, which is really important because they're not the biggest team, right? Draymond Green really plays the center for them, but he's a very good help defender, very smart defender, and they've been very good defensively, right? Tisano Anderson's been very good. Kent Bazemore's been very good defensively. They have guys who can defend, and they have guys who are willing to defend. But what's also ridiculous about Steph's stretch is that the Warriors are only 8-5 during this entire time, which tells you how much of an impact he really has. If he wasn't there, this team would not be winning many games. And actually, I'm going to get into how many games they've actually have won when he hasn't been there. But it's crazier, too, because he's getting double-teamed, triple-teamed, blitzed. The defense's whole game plan is to stop him. They don't really care about anyone else. And he's averaging these amount of points during the stretch and shooting these percentages. It's unbelievable. And the thing is, he's doing this against good teams, too. It's not just against, the weaker talent of the NBA. He's doing it against Philadelphia, who right now is the number one team in the East. He had 49 against them. He had 41 against Milwaukee, who is third in the East. 53 and 32 against Denver, who is unreal with Nikola Jokic in the 4th seed in the West. 36 against Miami, who is right now a game back of the 6th seed in the East. And then he had 47 against Boston, who's a 6th seed in the East and has a lot of talent there. And what's interesting, too, is that the Warriors are 1-7 without Steph in the lineup. They're 1-6. They're 29-24 with Steph in the lineup. So they would be actually a playoff team if Steph played all his games, which is interesting, too. Now, to get into my opinion side of this argument, is the fact is there are a few things I'm going to break down within it, right? Is Steph the MVP? Should he be a top 5 MVP candidate? How dangerous can the Warriors be? And is Steph the overall best offensive talent in the NBA? So these are a little different segments I'm going to break down because of the stretch he's on. So is Steph the MVP of the league? No, he's not. Because ultimately, even though his impact is you could argue is better than everyone else's in the MVP list, it's because his team's 9th in the West that he's not going to get it. Because people are going to compare that to the Russell Westbrook run. But the Russell Westbrook run, the team was 6th in the West when they had him, when he averaged that triple-double season, when he averaged 30 points, 10 rebounds, 11 assists. And his stretch is amazing, but also look at Bradley Beal, right? Bradley Beal's averaging more points than Steph Curry. And his team is 10th in the East right now. No one's saying that, Bradley Beal should be in the MVP conversation. And Bradley Beal has Russell Westbrook on his team. I get it, right? When he's been playing for the Warriors, they have a winning record. But the thing is, they're the 9th seed in the West. They're not going to give it to a guy whose team is right now not in playoff contention or at least a 6th seed in the conference. And look, you can contribute that. That's not necessarily fair because the Warriors don't have a great supporting cast. Steph's been in and out of the lineup and everything like that. But again, record and winning does matter in the MVP talks. It's why Giannis has won the MVP over LeBron in the last couple of years because his team's had a better record, right? It's just how it works, right? You have to have, it's great statistics on a really winning team. It's why Jokic is most likely going to win the MVP because he's been durable, he's been there all the time, and his team's 4th in the West, and the West is harder to win, right? So that also can play a factor in Steph Curry's MVP case. The West is tougher, but he's not in playoff contention, so he's not the MVP. And that's just how I feel about it. But he should be in the top 5 of MVP. You can even say he's top 4. My top 5 candidates are Jokic, Embiid, Giannis, Steph, and Chris Paul. Those are my top 5 MVP candidates. And the reason why he has to be considered for it is because, like I said, his level of impact on the team. They're 29-24 when he's there. And the fact that he's playing unreal this season when getting hounded and double-teamed and triple-teamed. And he's having the best offensive season of his career in terms of points scored. But he's not going to be the MVP because his team's 9th in the West. But he should be in the conversation because if they somehow are able to turn this around and get higher up, you never know what's going to happen. So I think that you have, and the reason why you put him in that conversation is because Damian Lillard has been hurt, a little bit inconsistent recently. LeBron's hurt, Harden's hurt, and that's the way you look at it. But Steph should be definitely in the conversation for MVP. And, like, totally understanding of that. Now, how dangerous can the Warriors be? I'm sorry, actually, before I get to that, this is why also another reason he should be in top 5 is because you can't have a guy who's having this historically good of a season not be at least in the conversation. I don't think he is the MVP, like I said, because record is the reason that's holding him back. If the team was the 6th seed in the West, I actually would probably say you should give it to him because he's been playing at that high of a level. But Nikola Jokic has a greater efficiency rating in terms of, and the fact is that's basically saying, like I've explained, PER in basketball is a term that a lot of people are confused about, right? What it basically is that it boils down to players' contributions into one number, right? It basically explains how efficient you are, how good you are when you're on the court, how good your offense is, how good your defense, but how good the team runs. And the reason why Nikola Jokic is my MVP over Steph, over Embiid. Embiid's been out more games, so that does play a factor, even though he's been, I think, slightly better than Jokic this season. But Jokic, what's interesting about what he's done, and I know Steph outplayed him last night, I get that. But Jokic has the best PER in the league. He's 7th in assists, 10th in scoring, 9th in rebounds, right? He's top 10 in every statistical category offensively that matters. Steph is 2nd in scoring, but he's not top 10 or top 5 in any statistical category outside of that, besides maybe 3-point shooting. And what's interesting about all this stuff, and interesting for us to break down, is the fact that, look, Steph's a top 5 MVP candidate because of what he's been able to produce this season, right? He's been able to help this team win when he's been there. He's had incredible stretches, but you can't put him over Jokic, who's been there more games. His team has a better record, and he has a better overall impact in terms of PER. I know that you have to put in context, right? Jokic is not getting double-teamed and triple-teamed like Steph is. I get that. But if you look at statistics and you look at record and you look at overall, impact, Jokic has a bigger impact than Steph has had. He just has. And it's how it works. I mean, PER is the overall impact you have on the game. And Jokic's number 1 in the NBA in that department. So that's the way I have to look at it. And that's why I can't quite put Steph in the top 5 of MVP candidates because, you can't quite put him as the MVP. He's top 5 because of the way he's been able to produce, the incredible stretch he's been on, the impact he's had on this team, the reason why they can't win without him. But they ultimately are the 9th seed in the West, and that's going to be held against him, right? It's how it works. It's how it works because, again, then you could say like Bradley Beal should be in the MVP conversation when his team's 10th in the West, 10th in the East. But obviously 10th in the East is a high losing record compared to the West where it's actually a 500 record. But that's just the point I want to make for you guys, that like I'm not completely just saying that he should never be in the MVP conversation because his team's 9th in the West. He should be in the MVP conversation. It's just that I take Jokic, Embiid, and Giannis over him because those guys have better records of their teams and an overall a higher PER and a little bit better impact offensively than just scoring the ball at a high level. And I think that ultimately plays a part in MVP. I know Steph's been incredibly valuable to the Warriors this year, but their record ultimately is going to hurt his MVP case and why I think he's not the MVP but can be in the conversation at the same time. How dangerous can the Warriors be? Okay, this is questions people have had because they're thinking, oh, well, the Warriors can be incredibly dangerous once they get into the playoffs. If they get by Memphis, they could be really dangerous for those Utah Jazz. All right, well, here's what it depends on, okay? It depends on how well Steph plays in the playoffs, right? Because Steph is the only reason they're going to be able to win a game or two, right? If they play Utah, I think they're going to get swept. They could get one game if Steph goes off for like 50 points. But Utah's a top 4 defensive team in the league. They have a lot of size in the perimeter. I don't think the Warriors can be dangerous at all, right? The Warriors would only be dangerous if they had Klay Thompson in that lineup and maybe another star, right? They don't really have a ton of consistent level talent. I know Wiggins and Oubre have talent, but they're not consistent players. And Draymond Green's not a high-level scorer, right? He's averaging 6.6 points in the year. And in the most recent game, he had 2 points offensively. Now, he had 12 rebounds and 19 assists. But again, the point that people don't seem to understand is that just because a guy's having an incredible stretch on the offensive end doesn't necessarily mean that when they play against high-level competition in the playoffs that he's going to be able to do that every night and a team's going to win every night. That's not how this stuff works, right? It's not how it works. So my argument to that is that it all depends on Steph, and it also depends on how well their defense is, right? They're 7th in defensive efficiency, like I mentioned earlier. So they could be dangerous based on that. But I think the fact that people are just undermining Memphis is a little nuts to me, right? Memphis has better overall talent. Memphis is a really explosive team. And when I look at Memphis too, Memphis has had some tough breaks recently when Jokic had 47 against them and they lost by 3 points in overtime. But they won they won against Portland the other night. I mean, I don't know, man. I think that this is kind of a crazy argument. And the fact is, Memphis is better in terms of offensive efficiency. The Warriors are 20th. Memphis is 14th. And if you look at defensive efficiency, the Warriors, I think, are better. But what's interesting about this argument is just that, yeah, the Warriors are okay. They're one spot above Memphis. So Memphis has a better offense and a one spot lower defense. So Memphis has more talent, right? Jaren Jackson's back, Jr.'s back. He's a guy that last year put up like 18 points a game. John Morant, guy who can put up 18 points a game. Now, some people are saying, okay, Memphis is really young. They're not ready for the big moment. I just don't think you can just easily say that Memphis is going to not make the postseason again. I think that they took that hard last year where they couldn't make it against Portland, and I think they're going to take it a little bit more seriously this season. And the reason why I say that is because they're going to attack this in the sense that they're going to take this very personally. And I think when you look at this from that angle, you can't just quite say that Memphis is not going to make a run and trying to get that 8th seed. They already have it, but they're not going to go in the play-in and not try to play their best basketball, right? So I think it depends on Steph and Curry. I think Memphis does have more talent. And I think also what comes down from the Warriors, if they get into the postseason, they don't have enough talent to at least contend with Utah. Utah has, I think I've mentioned this before, Utah has like 7 guys who average over 12 points a game. And Utah's very balanced. They're the 3rd best offense and the 4th best defense. Rudy Gobert, I think, is the 2nd best defensive player in the league this year. I think Ben Simmons should win Defensive Player of the Year, but Rudy Gobert's got a great case for it. And I don't think Golden State beats Utah. I don't think they even win a game, right? I think Memphis would actually pose a better threat because Memphis has overall a little bit better talent. But the thing is, Steph's season has been unbelievable, right? And I think that the Warriors can be dangerous depending on how well he plays. If he plays at an incredibly high level, if he plays, averaging these amount of points, then yeah, they can make a great run. But, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how they continue to move forward as the schedule continues to dwindle down in terms of games as they get to that play-in. So that'll be really interesting to see how this stuff all unfolds soon. And anyway, it'll be really interesting to see how this stuff all kind of gets untwined and sees what goes on. But I think the ultimate crazy question, too, about this is Steph the overall best offensive talent in the NBA? Some people are saying he's the most lethal offensive talent. I've seen debates about it. And in terms of offensive talent, I would say no. I would say that KD's a better offensive talent. I would say LeBron's a better offensive talent. And I would say that Harden is a better offensive talent. Because all those guys can do a little bit more. I think KD's a little bit more efficient. KD's size makes him really a lot harder to guard. I think LeBron's overall impact of being able to just dominate you in the paint. I think LeBron's mid-range fadeaway post-game is great. I think he's a good shooter. I think the passing of LeBron makes him a crazier offensive talent. And Harden, too, right? Harden can just, he gets to the free throw line a ton, right? So, and the fact he's a great passer, he can score from all levels. I think they're better offensive talents than Steph. Now, I think Steph is the most dangerous offensive player in the game. And the reason why is because he can shoot from anywhere and can get hot at any time. And what that does to a defense and why that becomes so difficult when teams are trying to get to, defend guys is that if guys are able to shoot the three at a really high level, you have to naturally play up on them, right? And Steph's smart enough where he's crafty enough going to the basket where he can finish pretty well into the basket. But the problem with guarding Steph is that Steph is really good at using pin downs, cross screens, pick and rolls to get open threes for himself. But also Steph will shoot threes from half court. And the reason why that's so incredible is that the reason why he might not be the greatest offensive talent, but he's, in my opinion, the top 4. But he's the most dangerous because compared to Damian Lillard, he's a little bit more efficient when it comes to three-point shooting. And he's a guy that also can carry teams a little more on the offensive end. I'm not saying Damian Lillard can't do that. Damian Lillard's obviously very good. But Steph Curry, during this stretch, has shown that he's the most dangerous offensive player in the league because of where he can shoot from, the levels at which he can shoot, his handle, his IQ, and understanding where he can get his shots off, understanding the Warriors' offense really well. This is what makes him Steph Curry. And that's why, in my opinion, he's the most dangerous offensive talent in the league because of the efficiency of how he's scoring right now, the fact that he can shoot from anywhere, the fact that he's getting doubled and triple teamed and still shooting an efficient percentage from 2 and from 3, and the fact that he can literally carry teams past, high-level, defensive teams. Think about it. He had 49 points against the number 2 defense in the NBA. Put that in context. The number 2 defense in the NBA in the Philadelphia 76ers. He had 49 points, basically getting double teams because he's the most dangerous offensive player in the league. And it's not even a close conversation there. It's not even close. And that's where I kind of feel about that. It's like he's so good and so talented on the offensive end, but I think the reason why he's so dangerous is because if he gets hot, there's nothing you can do. And he can shoot from anywhere. And I think also the fact that he's, compared to Lillard, he's better off the ball. So the thing is, you have to chase him off like a million screens that the Warriors run. And then on the ball, he can create his shot really well as well. So the problem is, he's a really difficult matchup and he's really difficult to guard. So that's where I kind of feel about it. So again, his stretch has been unreal. I think, one of the best stretches I've ever seen in NBA history in terms of like my lifetime. And, just to recap it, I don't think he's the MVP. He's a top 5 MVP candidate. The Warriors aren't really a dangerous team, but he could make them dangerous depending on if he keeps the stretch up. And he's the most dangerous offensive player in the league. That's how I feel about Steph Curry and his stretch and what he means to the game. He's unreal. He's a top 5 player in the game, and I think this season he's proving everyone who thought he wasn't quite there wrong, and that's where I go with that. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, we're going to be talking about the struggles of the Portland Trailblazers, as well as later on my show, I'm going to be breaking down my top 5 NBA draft prospects for the NBA draft coming up in June. Should be a good segment. Couple segments, and I encourage you guys to listen to those, and I will see you guys when we come back from this quick break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder. If you missed my last segment, I talked about Steph Curry, his unbelievable stretch he's been playing the last 13 games, why I think he's in the MVP conversation but not the MVP, why he makes the Warriors potentially dangerous going into the play-in because of his incredible play, but ultimately I think the Warriors are going to get bounced out in the play-in. And also the fact that he's the most dangerous offensive talent. So all that stuff is on the last segment. I encourage you guys to check that out if you haven't already. Later on my show, I'm going to be talking about my top 5 NBA draft prospects. That'll be really interesting as well to break that down for you guys. But on this segment, I'm going to break down a team that's been struggling recently, who I really like their players a lot, and that's the Portland Trailblazers. The Portland Trailblazers have really struggled recently, and it's a whole host of reasons, right? I'm going to put it in context for you guys, obviously. But just to give you guys some understanding of like what has happened to Portland. Portland has been the 6th seed in the West for a very long time, right? They've basically been in the 6th seed for a good while. But unfortunately, due to the fact that they've lost 4 straight, Dallas has now overtaken them as the 6th seed in the West. Now Portland's in that play-in situation, and it comes down to a few things, right? They have had injuries to CJ McCollum beginning of the year. Damian Lillard's been out for a couple games with a right knee issue, and the thing is, they've lost 6 out of the last 7 games, right? They lost to the Grizzlies by 2, the Clippers by 1, the Nuggets by 1, the Celtics by 1, the Hornets by 8, the Heat by 9, and right now they're in the play-in situation, like I said. That's a situation no one really wants to be in. No one really wants to be in that situation. So, with all that being said, this is kind of a difficult stretch right now for Portland, as they've lost 6 out of their last 7 games, and it's just a really difficult stretch overall. Now, what are their issues? Now, the thing is, right, Portland plays in the Western Conference, right, which is ultimately very hard, right, because the teams are generally better. If you look at the records, they're generally better, and they had to deal with a lot of stuff. Zach Collins, who's a very good power forward for them, still isn't back in the lineup, and they've really struggled recently, especially closing out games. So, we're gonna break down what their main issues are, and I'm gonna explain them. There are about 4 different issues that I see what's wrong with Portland at this time, and why I think they really haven't played very well and lived up to expectations recently, allowing Dallas to overtake them for the 6th spot. Now, I think, unfortunately, Dallas has been playing much better basketball recently, and I think that Portland can figure it out. But Portland has struggled, right? And I think it ultimately comes down to what teams are playing better are going to get the better seed. So that's ultimately where I go there. But here's how I'm going to break it down for you guys. The number one issue with Portland at this moment in time is their defense, right? Their defense is just not very good. It's terrible, right? It's just really bad defensively. And if you heard my podcast in the past, this is one thing I've criticized the Brooklyn Nets for, is the fact that they don't play defense, and that's why I don't necessarily, jump on the Brooklyn Nets bandwagon in terms of them winning a championship, because I don't think they play defense. I think you have to be decent enough offensively. You have to have at least a top 10 offense, and you got to be top 10, top 5 defensively in order to win a world championship, right? The Lakers basically won because they had LeBron James and Anthony Davis and an incredible, incredible defense. They were top 5 defensively all season last year. They're number 1 this year. It's why I think with they're fully healthy and everyone's clicking in all cylinders, why the Lakers can definitely win a world championship. But if you think the Brooklyn Nets defense is bad, guys, Portland is a lot worse. Portland is 29th in defensive efficiency. Let's put that in context for you guys. There's 30 NBA teams, so where does that put Portland? Oh, right, they're the 2nd worst defense in the NBA right now. On the positive end, they're 6th in offensive rating, but they're not balanced. They have a negative net rating. They're negative 0.4. And it's primarily because they play terrible, terrible defense. They're 25th in opponents' points per game. They're 18th in rebounding. They're 18th in total opponents' three-point percentage. They're 22nd in opponents' rebounds per game. They're 27th in opponents' overall field goal percentage per game. And they have no strong interior defender, right? Last year, they at least had Hassan Whiteside, who could block some shots and do a good job there. Enes Kanter and Yusuf Nurkic are more offensive guys and rebounding guys. They're not good defenders. Enes Kanter, while I really love Enes Kanter because I loved him on the Knicks, he's not a good defender, right? He's one of the probably worst big men defenders in the league. That's a high-level big at least. And Yusuf Nurkic is the same way. Yusuf Nurkic plays hard, plays physical, but he's not a good defender. And it's primarily because these guys are not the most athletic guys. And, they get taken advantage of big time in pick and roll situations by really good guards who understand to play the pick and roll and abuse their, not necessarily the fact that they aren't mobile, but the kind of lack of mobility because they're just not very athletic, and that's kind of what's harming them to an extent. And Again, when you're 29th in defensive efficiency, it's going to be hard for you to win any championship because that means you can't stop anyone. And a perfect example is they were up at the end of the game against the Clippers, and they were up 112-109, and the Clippers came back and beat them. And it was primarily because their defense just wasn't good down that last minute. They're up 112-107, and in the last minute 30, the Clippers outscored them 6-0. It's because the Clippers could score on them easily, and the Clippers could get stops on them. Right? Clippers have a top 10 defense. Portland is the second worst defense in the NBA. And Portland could score with anyone, but again, it's like them last year, right? They could always score, but they can't play defense. And it's not because they don't try defensively. It's not because CJ McCollum, Damian Lillard, and all these guys don't try defensively. But they're not good defensively. They're not a good defensive team at all. And that's where I go there. They're just not. And if you look at a year ago for this team, a year ago they were 27th. So they were slightly better last year defensively. And this year they've gotten worse. And which surprises me in a sense because they have Derrick Jones Jr., who's known as a pretty good defender. Robert Covington's known as a pretty good defender. And I thought guys like Anthony Simons could be a good defender, but those guys haven't really turned out to be quite the really good defenders that they're supposed to be. And that's their problem. They can't stop anyone. And that's their number one issue right now is that against teams they've been able to play, they can't stop anyone. I mean, a perfect example, if you look at Portland last night allowed 130 points to the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies have the 14th ranked offense in the NBA, which is slightly above average. And they scored 130 points against Portland last night. And Portland lost that game by 2 points. Portland could score. CJ McCollum, Damian Lillard, Yusuf Nurkic all had over 22 points last night. McCollum had 22, Nurkic had 26, and Lillard had 27. But they don't stop anyone. They don't play good defense. And that's what's going to hold them back from being a championship-level team. Because everyone's saying, well, Portland... Well, Charles Barkley was a guy who's a big fan of Portland. And look, there's other guys who are big fans of them too, right? And I'm a big fan of their offense. They play incredibly good offense. But they don't have any interior defenders. Their guards are not big enough to stop the bigger guards of the Western Conference. And they look, their numbers just don't point to a good defensive team, and that's what's going to hold them back as they continue to move forward. And that's a big problem I see with this team as they continue to progress and try to be a championship level team. Is the fact that they do not play defense. They don't. And in order to win, you got to be able to play defense. And that's an important factor that I think people are not, putting into account. And look, Barkley has a reason to think this team's very good. They have the talent to totally win a world championship. The issue that comes down for them is they just don't play defense. And I think that the fact is, if you're 29th in defensive efficiency, you're 25th in opponents' points per game, you're 27th in overall field goal percentage, you're 18th in three-point percentage, you're 22nd in opponents' rebounds per game. Again, you're not forcing teams to shoot inefficient shots. You're not rebounding at a high level, even though you got Yusuf Nurkic and Enes Kanter, who both can rebound. You're getting crushed in the glass still because you don't have a ton of size outside of that. And the fact is, all they really are is an offensive team. That's why they have a negative net rating. And because they've had guys in and out of the lineup with injuries, and the fact that they don't play good enough defense to win games as they continue to progress. And that's where I kind of go with them at the NBA level. That's their first main issue that I see with this team. Their second big issue is, recently at least, is just not being able to close out games, which is interesting because this team is third in clutch efficiency in the NBA because Damian Lillard is top 10 in the NBA in the clutch moments. What's the issue for them, though, is they've had six of their 7 losses have been by single digits. And if you're looking at four of their last 6 losses have been by 2 points or less. So they've been in those games, had an opportunity to win them, and you can contribute that to defense, but also the fact that they haven't probably properly executed on the offensive end and get efficient shots at the end of games, right? You can't rely on Damian Lillard to make every shot at the end of the game for the team to win. Now, he can make some of those shots, but again, this is the problem with Portland. I was looking at the clutch efficiency stats for players on NBA.com, and the only guy that's in the top 50 from their team is Damian Lillard. No one else is. And the problem is that even though I think CJ McCollum's a very talented player and has hit big shots and had big games, for example, Game 5 against the Lakers last year, even though they lost, he was out of his mind how well he played in that game, right? But the issue is this year, CJ McCollum's been in and out of the lineup, and the problem is, he hasn't always been super consistent. And then the problem is that if you're only relying on Damian Lillard to make clutch shots in the end of the games, it's very easy for defenses to guard and game plan for that, even though Damian Lillard's a really hard offensive player overall to game plan for. And the thing is, that ultimately doesn't show a high level of balance in the clutch. And that's why they've been losing these games, right? Because their defense isn't good, so they can't get stops. And offensively, they're not properly executing at the end of the games to win those games, or maybe making the right call. So it's a whole host of things, right? And the thing is, they have to get back to that team that is really good in the clutch. That's what was helping them earlier in the season. That's why they're doing well when they didn't have a ton of the guys there. And that's why when I look at that, I say, okay, they haven't been winning games because they haven't been very good in the clutch. And that's because of their defense, and also the fact that I think it's mostly their defense. I think also a small reason is the fact that maybe their plays and execution hasn't been quite as good, and they haven't been quite as efficient down the stretch in order to win these games, which they were all winnable games. All winnable games. You lose 4 out of your last 6 losses by 2 points or less. That means you were in those games and had a great chance to win those games. Great chance, and they couldn't get it done. So that's where you ultimately go at the end of the day with these teams. Again, look at the Nuggets game where they had like 3 opportunities to make a putback and couldn't make it. So they had great opportunities, and they need to close out those games if they want to avoid not being in that play-in spot, right? Because they have the tiebreaker over Dallas. So if they have the same record as Dallas, they'll get the 6th seed. Dallas will get 7. But if they continue to not do well defensively in the clutch, and then continue to have lapses in execution at times down the stretch, they're going to be at the 7th seed and have to fight with Memphis, Golden State, and San Antonio to get that spot in the playoffs. So they got to figure that end out as well, because they are 3rd in clutch efficiency. So they got to be able to kind of get back to that level again. Another reason why they haven't been very good, and this is a reason I'm going to explain in a little bit of depth for people that have not really followed Portland as closely, and the fact is that they've had stars out of the lineup in the lineup. Just they haven't been consistently there, right? So McCollum was out over 2 months of the year for a broken foot, which is definitely concerning for the fact that Portland could have done much better with him there. CJ McCollum before he was injured, was going to be an all-star level player. I don't even think it's going to be close. I mean, his statistics this year are fantastic. He's averaging 23 points a game on 44.5% shooting and 38.8% from 3. His effective field goal percentage is 54.2. I mean, the guy's a legitimate second star, right? He makes up arguably the best backcourt in the entire league with Damian Lillard. But he was out with a broken foot, putting more strain on Damian Lillard to produce every night. And ultimately, it kind of hurt Portland because they didn't get that kind of camaraderie with the rest of those new guys as they came in. Now, their offense hasn't really seemed to suffer from that, but it's more defensively, right? I think chemistry actually needs to be really built on the defensive end. And having CJ McCollum not be there for a little while has been a problem. I think the fact that Damian Lillard was out during some of these games too has hurt them too with that right knee sprain. Now, he was there last night against Memphis, but he has been in and out of the lineup in the last 6 games or so with that right knee injury, and again, he's their best player. They need him there, and he's the guy they trust in the clutch as well. So that's also attributed maybe to the fact that they haven't been able to close out the clutch either. Yusuf Nurkic had a right knee problem, and he just came back about a month and a half ago. And he's a guy that last year was a big piece for them. He was averaging about 18 points a game, a little under that. And he's a guy that he's a big post presence. He's a good, smart passer. And that's the thing. They hadn't had him either. And the big thing, too, is they haven't had Zach Collins as well, right? Zach Collins is a guy, for just context, right, was a lottery pick out of Gonzaga, kind of worked up his way. And what's interesting about Zach Collins, though, is the fact that, what's interesting about him especially is that he's a guy that can stretch the court. He's a guy that can do a lot of different things on the offensive end for you. But I think the interesting thing for him is that, if you look at his career stats, they don't jump out at you, right? They don't look at them. You're like, oh wow, this guy is the next great player. But I think what's interesting is that he did average 7 points a game, and what's interesting about that too is that he's another added element, right? He can post up, he can rebound, he can block some shots. He adds a defensive component, right? And he's a guy that can stretch the court. And he's also tall. He's 7 feet tall. He's 6'11", 250. He adds some size, some strength, some physicality. He adds some toughness. And him not being able to be in the lineup has hurt the guys too. It hurt the guys being the Portland Trailblazers. So with all that being said, Portland's had the injury bug hit them at the wrong time, and like a lot of other teams, unfortunately, and it's kind of plagued them recently in this kind of stretch where because at the beginning of the year, Damian Lillard was looking like the MVP of the league because he was able to get a team that wasn't super talented to the 5th spot in the West, and that was primarily all because of what he was able to do from an offensive perspective. But since he's not necessarily been in the lineup, since CJ McCollum's been injured, Yusuf Nurkic has been out of the lineup, it really has hurt them as they try to kind of piece together why this run has been happening in terms of losing these games that they should be winning or have a great chance to win. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's been their biggest problem, is not being able to have a consistent reliability from their stars. And that's the reason why Brooklyn has a lot of concerns as well. When you look at Brooklyn, right, there's a lot of concerns with them too because of the reliability of the stars. That's why the Lakers have concerns too, because Anthony Davis and LeBron James have had injuries, right? LeBron James is still injured, and Anthony Davis just came back, and he's playing his second game against the Dallas tonight. So ultimately, that's kind of the thing I look at and say, okay, they haven't had a good defense. They haven't played as well in the clutch. And they had guys who've been in and out of the lineup, which ultimately does make a very big difference as you're trying to win playoff games and get into the playoffs. And not necessarily get in the playoffs, because I think Portland will be in the playoffs, but you don't want to be in that play-in spot, right? I found the play-in to be ridiculous anyway, but you don't want to be in that situation, because what that ultimately does for a team is that you're in a situation where your fate is uncertain. And when your fate's uncertain, it sometimes is stressful. Now, Damian Lillard's a guy who had to play in this play-in last time and was able to get him through. I think they're going to get this. If they play in the play-in, they'll get the 7th spot. And I think they're going to be a dangerous team for any team in the playoffs because of their talent. But the problem is the stars have been in and out of the lineup. They don't play defense, and they have not been great in terms of closing out games recently. But the last reason why they've really struggled, I think, is because of Yusuf Nurkic's lack of production this year. And Yusuf Nurkic is a guy who can really get it going offensively. In 2019 through 2020, he averaged a little under 18 points a game, 17.6 to be exact. He averaged over 10 rebounds at 10.3. He shot 88.6% from the free throw line. He's a guy that can just produce at a high level. He's a good post player going to his right hand. He's physical, he's strong. Unfortunately, since he's been back from his knee injury, he hasn't always been in the lineup. He's been in and out with knee injuries and load management maintenance. But his stats are just not very good. He's only averaging 10 points a game this year, and he had a great game against Memphis last night where he had 26 points. But it's just coming down to the fact he's also, his free throws have seen a major dip in production. He's 61% from the free throw line this year. I'm going to repeat that again. He was 88.6% a year ago. He's 61% this year. 61%. You have to, again, especially because he takes threes, he shoots mid-range jump shots. This is important. He's 61.3% from the free throw line. He shoots 36% from three, which is pretty interesting because a year ago he was a 20% three-point shooter. So what's interesting is that his free throws have really dipped down, and his rebounds have dipped way down, his assists have dipped down, and his blocks have dipped down. He averaged almost 2 blocks a game a year ago. He's only averaging 0.9 now. So his overall production just hasn't been there. And the reason why that's been a concern is because he offers like an interior presence, right? If he's not scoring at a high level, teams don't have to game plan for him as carefully, because I think he's like that third star, right? I think Carmelo Anthony's that piece off the bench that's he still can play at a really high level. But Yusuf Nurkic is that, in my opinion, that third star they can have if he plays to his capabilities. And he hasn't, right? Look, his problem also is that he's not good defensively like Enes Kanter. He struggles in pick-and-roll situations because he's not super quick laterally. He's had a lot of injuries, and teams exploit that. But offensively, 10 points a game, if he's giving you 10 points a game, that's not good enough to win, a playoff series if he's not producing at a high level, because he's capable of doing that, right? I mean, I'm looking at his, ever since he got to Portland, he's averaged basically over 14 points a game up until the season. He averaged 15 his first season there. He averaged 14 the next season, 15.6. Then his 8 games last year that he played, he averaged 17.6. And then this year he's averaging only 10 points a game. So he's really had a dip in production, and I think that's really hurt Portland because they don't have a third reliable scorer in the starting lineup. Now they can go to Enes Kanter and Carmelo Anthony off the bench, but they need Yusuf Nurkic to be the Yusuf Nurkic of last year and of 2018 through 2019, at least as 15 to 17 point scorer and a 10 rebound guy. When you go down almost 3 rebounds a game in terms of production and you go down 20, my apologies, when you go down almost 28 percentage points in free throws, that's a major concern. And the fact that he's talented enough to be better than that, that's the concern with Portland. So to break it down for you guys, right, Portland is struggling because their defense is really bad. They haven't quite been good in clutch situations. Their stars have been in and out of the lineup, and Yusuf Nurkic's production has been very down from what it has been in the past, I think hurting Portland in the process. So that's why Portland's been struggling, in my opinion, and why I think they're going to be in the 7th spot in the Western Conference and lose a good chance to, I think, look, actually they'll play Phoenix, but I'm not sure they're going to beat Phoenix, to be honest with you. So they've really been struggling, and they're in a rough place right now, and it's because of the things I just listed for you guys. We're going to take a quick commercial break here, but when I come back, I'm going to break down my top 5 NBA draft prospects, and it will be really interesting to break them down. I'm excited to break them down because I have, a lot of excitement when it comes to this draft. I think the draft's going to be interesting. So I'll break that down when we come back from this commercial break. See you guys soon.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Michael Schroeder. If you missed my last segment, I talked about the Portland Trailblazers, their recent big-time struggles, and the fact that they're now in the play-in situation in the Western Conference, and I explained why they have been struggling and what their concerns going forward should be. Now, this segment is going to be exciting, right? With the NFL draft coming up, a lot of people are excited about that, but I'm excited for the NBA draft, and I've already started thinking about prospects that could fit in certain situations, but I'll get to that, at a later date. But at this point right now, I'm just going to break down my top 5 draft prospects, right? Just the top 5 players I think are the most NBA ready, the 5 best players in the draft, all this kind of stuff, right? And I'm going to break it down for you guys, and we're going to get into it. So we're going to start at number 5. Number 5, I have Davion Mitchell from Baylor. The junior guard had an incredible year. He led Baylor to the national championship alongside Jared Butler and Maceo Teague. And he averaged 14 points a game this year, 5.5 assists, and 1.9 steals. He was efficient. He shot 51% from the floor, 44.7% from 3. And in the national championship, he had 15 points, showed his ability that he was quick off the bounce, can shoot it off the dribble, off the catch. And he has the ability to score from all 3 levels, right? He can score from the 3-point line. He can score from mid-range. He's quick to get to the basket. The thing with him, too, is that he's strong, right? He's 6'2". He's really athletic. He uses his body well to create separation. He's physical when he drives to the basket. And especially when bigs switch onto him, he's really good at taking advantage of that because, especially in today's NBA, there is a lot of switching that goes on where bigs are going to be guarding guards, and he knows how to take advantage of that very well, especially because bigs are usually slower footed than guards, so he does a good job in that. But the thing with him is that he was considered, I think, the best on-ball defender in the entire country. And because of the way he disrupts ball handlers by picking them up 94 feet, the reason why he's so good also is not just the pressure he puts up on you, but the fact that he's active with his hands, the fact that he moves his feet really well, the fact that he's really physical. Again, this guy is a big-time defender. And he made things very hard for a lot of teams. He forces you into situations that you don't want to be in. He forces you to play faster than you want to play. And as a result of that, a lot of guards, especially in the NCAA tournament, really struggled. Jalen Suggs, who I'll talk about later on in this segment, struggled even with that too because, even though Jalen Suggs is an incredible athlete who can play at a fast and slow speeds, he got in a lot of difficult situations. I mean, I can even look at Justin Moore from Villanova, right? He got in situations where he had to, he had to get in situations where he got sped up and had to make, passes that he normally wouldn't make, and it made things more difficult for that team going forward. Especially because Villanova had a lead at halftime and then just dwindled. And that was primarily because Davion Mitchell's on-ball pressure is so elite. And the fact is, he is just, again, what he brings to an NBA team is a guy who's quick off the bounce, a guy that can, get to the basket, hit mid-range, shoot threes. But I think the best attribute, and the reason why I think he's such a high prospect, is that defensively, he can play right away. He's going to be a phenomenal defender. He's a guy that's going to get into a lot of these guards and be physical, and he moves his feet incredibly well, and he's going to be a disruptor. So a lot of these teams, especially looking at the draft situation right now, you're looking at certain teams that are struggling. I think he's a guy that can go in and bring a good defensive mindset to this team. And I think that this is what's going to be interesting, right? If you look at Cleveland, for example, or Orlando or Oklahoma City, they have great opportunities to bring in a guy like Mitchell to disrupt and bring good defense to these teams. Because Cleveland is a good defensive team, obviously, but their guards are not really good defenders. And that's just something I think they need. They need a strong defender. They were good at the beginning of the year, but now they're 20th in defensive efficiency, right? So I think, him going to a Cleveland, him going to a Orlando, or even down the line like a Washington, I think, he could fit from 5 through 7. The reason I think he's better than guys like Scotty Barnes and Jonathan Kuminga is because I think, he can score at all three levels. And the fact is, I think his skill set is most NBA ready compared to those two guys. I think Kuminga and Barnes have more potential to be better. But I think at this point in time, I would take Mitchell just because his defense is so on par and he has an overall really good skill set. His only issue is his size at 6'2". Some people take question with that because they're like, okay, can he score over bigger defenders? But I think he can. And then the fact is he's not a good free throw shooter, only at 65%. So some people think that the 3-point shooting he had last year was just an aberration and not a logistical, realistic thing that's going to occur for years to come. I would say that he improved tremendously with his 3-point shot over time. I think he's going to be a good 3-point shooter. But I think the biggest thing he brings to a team is the fact that he can score at all three levels, and that he's going to be an excellent on-ball defender because the NBA is so guard-centric. You need a guy who's going to be able to defend at a high level if you're a team in the lottery. And I think he's a guy that can really help those kind of teams. And that's the reason why I think he's the 5th best prospect in the draft. I think that, Kuminga and Barnes and Kai Jones and, these players are excellent prospects. The thing is, though, they're very raw, right? Kuminga's a guy who isn't a very good shooter. He's a little bit raw in terms of finishing around the basket, even though he had good stats with G League Ignite. He has a lot of tooling and retooling he needs to fix. Scotty Barnes is very good at passing the ball, but again, Scotty Barnes can't really shoot. And he's not an elite level finisher around the basket. He's an elite level passer, but he's still, I think he has a lot more room to grow. I think, even Kai Jones, a guy that he has some, things he needs to improve. He needs to get stronger and stuff like that. So NBA ready right now, I would take Mitchell, right? Those three guys I just named, I think, could be better prospects down the line. I'm saying going into the draft, this is the fifth best guy, I think, because he's most NBA ready. He's going to provide instant value to your team right away. And his only issues really is like the consistency of his shooting and the fact that he's not like an elite level scorer, but he's a good scorer, and he proved against big teams that he can score the basketball. So I think he's a fifth best prospect. The fourth best prospect, I think, is Evan Mobley. So a little background on him. He's the Pac-12 Player of the Year. He averaged 16.4 points a game, 8.7 rebounds, and 2.9 blocks on 57.8% shooting from the floor. He has the ability to attack from the face-up position. He can rip and go by guys. He has he has good hands when catching lobs or catching passes underneath. Even though he's skinny, he does have really strong hands where he can catch and go right up and finish. And I think the fact is that he has a really unique skill set. He can handle the ball really well for a guy at his size. Like, he can initiate the break, and he can shoot a little bit too. I mean, he's not a great shooter, but like, he has the ability to do that. And the fact is, he can take bigs off the dribble, but he also can post you up as well. He's a guy that can be a lob threat and pick and rolls. He's a guy that knows how to move without the basketball. He's a smart player. He understands how to play in high-low situations with other bigs. And the fact is, I think what's interesting about him is that he's a really unique level shot blocker. Like Mitchell, I think this guy has polished skill sets. I think the only thing that's not polished about him is the sense of like his physique, right? I think he needs to fill out, get stronger. But I think the reason why he's better than Mitchell is because he's an elite level shot blocker. I think that he's more of a matchup issue. He's a better offensive player. And I think the fact is that, when I mean a matchup issue, I think he possesses so many different skills, and his ceiling is higher. I understand people are saying like, Jonathan Kuminga should be higher than him and Scotty Barnes. But again, those guys are too raw at this point in time. Mobley's not raw. Like, he's got a great skill set about him. The problem with him is just more of his physique and sometimes just being physical all the time. But I think in the NCAA tournament, he was much better at that in terms of that. But I think, with him, it's just he has to be assertive. He has to get stronger. And I think he needs to continue to work on his three-point shot and mid-range shot, because right now he's like a 68% free throw shooter. I think he needs to get that up to 75%. But he's got the capabilities. And the thing is, he's a very good rebounder, very good shot blocker. And in the NCAA tournament, he did have very good statistics in most of the games. And he did do a lot of different things for the team. Again, him and Isaiah Mobley did a good job. Also, the fact that at USC, they were a top 15 offense and a top 5 defense. So, and they were the best team in terms of field goal percentage in the paint. And that was because of what Evan Mobley brings to the table. Again, he's a guy that, on offense, I think, can be really good as a small, like, kind of 5. You can stretch the court with him, go 5 out, because he can take bigs off the dribble, rip and go, facing them up, all that kind of stuff. I think he's good in the pick and roll in terms of rolling to the basket, because he's long, he's athletic, and you can lob it up to him. He's got good hands. He can finish around the rim pretty well. He tries to play physical. Like, sometimes he shies away from contact, but he got better at that as the year went on. I think he's a really good prospect. I think the fact is, he's also a guy that brings added rim protection to your team. And I think, he's got, a lot of the really good upside tools too. So I think in terms of, being ready to play, I think he brings a little bit more value than a guy like Mitchell does, because of just his size and his athleticism. But the fact that, he'll be more of a matchup issue for bigs than like Mitchell will be for guards. But again, he has to improve his three-point shooting, and he has to improve his physique. But overall, he's an excellent prospect. I think he's a number 4 prospect, and I think him, a guy like Jonathan Kuminga, Scotty Barnes, those guys' ceilings are through the roof. Obviously, but he and Mitchell are more polished than those other guys I just mentioned. But he's a better prospect than Mitchell because of his fact that he can do a lot of other things from a versatility standpoint that I think are going to make him a little bit more valuable when he comes into the draft. And that's where I go for my number 4. So again, number 5, Davion Mitchell, because the fact that he's going to bring incredible on-ball pressure defense. He's going to be a disruptor for your defense. On offense, he can score at all 3 levels. He's got a really good physique and strength about him. He's been in big moments. He's very matured with his game. He's basically very polished in terms of a lot of his skill sets. Great handle, great shot. And then I'm looking at Evan Mobley, and Evan Mobley is a guy that, changes the game from a shot blocking perspective, good rebounder. versatile, can take bigs off the dribble, can shoot a little bit, and is very athletic, and again can just do a whole lot for your team. And that's why I have him slightly over Mitchell, just because he can do a little bit more than Mitchell can. But both these guys are going to be, I think, guys who can provide great impact in different ways. The number 3 prospect, I look at Jalen Green from G League Ignite. And the reason why I look at him is because I think this guy is big time. And I really do. He averaged 17.9 points in the NBA G League for G League Ignite. And the big thing with him is he's a really high-level athlete. He has elite-level explosiveness. I mean, some of the dunks he threw down are just ridiculous. I mean, that team with him, Jonathan Kuminga, Isaiah Todd, this team was really athletic. A bunch of really young, stud, athletic guys. And the fact is, when he gets a dribble downhill and gets by guys, his explosiveness at the rim is next level. And I think he'll fit in right there because he can, take guys off the dribble and do a really good job there. But I think the fact is he really improved his three-point shooting from high school. He's, a 36.5 three-point shooter when he played in the G League, which is, again, a little above average, not incredible, but it's good. Again, he's projecting that he could be a better player, and he's heading in the right direction in terms of that category. He took also a lot of contested threes. He was 10 of 20 on open looks, which shows me that he is a good shooter. He also shot over 80% for the free throw line. That shows me again that he's a good shooter and has a lot of capabilities. And again, he's taking a lot of contested threes. He can make them at almost a 37% clip. That shows me the guy can really shoot the basketball. And I'm not saying he's going to be like next Steph Curry or something like that, but he can be a shooter that can complement his ability to get to the basket. And I think the fact that he improved that part of his game really is going to help him, and I think that's the reason why I have him as a number 3 draft prospect at the moment. He also is a guy, even though he's not really a playmaker, he has a positive assist-to-turnover ratio, 2.8 assists to 2.7 turnovers, so barely positive, but he does have a positive assist-to-turnover ratio, which is good. You want to see a young player that has that because a lot of young players don't necessarily have a positive assist-to-turnover ratio, and that's important, especially as a guard. You need to be able to take care of the basketball in order to give teams confidence in your game, and that's where I go with him. I think he's got, he got smarter. I think he, got better in terms of his decision making. He's not really a playmaker for others. He's more of a playmaker for himself, but that's okay. The fact that he still has a positive assist to turnover ratio is showing me that he's still a pretty smart player in terms of understanding reading defenses, right? All these players are smart in their own right. They understand the game of basketball, but it's understanding how to read defenses, especially he's playing against pro guys. It's hard to do that when you come right from high school anyway, too. But I think that, the really unique stuff about him is the fact that he is statistically the 3rd best ISO scorer in the G League this past season. And that's really where he can, dominate. His one move and go isolation style really works well. He's so explosive with his first step, really can get by guys and be explosive at the rim. And he really is just a tough guard, especially when he's getting downhill. He has a really quick first step. He's really good around the rim, and it makes it really difficult for defenses to guard him because he's got, he is very right hand dominant, but his first step is really difficult to guard and really difficult to cover, and that's what makes him such a unique talent. And in his only playoff appearance in the G League, he had 30 points, so he can play in big time moments and big time games, which does bode well for his draft stock as he heads into the draft in June. I think another incredible thing about him is that he's so good in transition. He was 73.7% at the rim, and that basically bodes from the fact that he's an excellent finisher in transition. He can finish above defenders, through defenders, around defenders. He has a really good ability to finish because he's so athletic and he's skilled. He really has been working on his skill set. He improved every year in high school. He's improved in the G League. So he's got that unique ability to finish around the rim really well, which does excite me in terms of looking at the draft prospect. The issue I have with him, though, is the reason why I can't put him over the next 2 guys I have on my list is because he doesn't have the unique handle that I'm looking for. Like, his handle needs definitely a lot of work. Not necessarily definitely a lot of work, but it needs work. I think he's more of just kind of a one move and go kind of player. And I think, at the next level, you got to have multiple moves you can go to. It got better, but I think, that's one aspect of his game that definitely is going to have to improve. And based on his trajectory, what he's been, I think it's going to improve, but that's what is holding him back, in my opinion. And then also the fact that he is not necessarily a consistent three-point shooter. Like in high school, he wasn't really a consistent one. He was better in the G League, he had a good percentage, but again, like on contested threes, he didn't have a high percentage, which not a lot of guys do, but there are guys who are better three-point shooters than him, I think, above him. I think also the fact that, again, he just doesn't have he's not necessarily a very patient player. He plays really fast all the time. I think for him, controlling his speeds is another difference for him. But I think he has an incredible ceiling. He's an incredible talent. So he's my third best prospect. At number 2, we got Cade Cunningham, who was a Big 12 freshman and player of the year, averaged 20 points a game, 6.2 rebounds, and 3.5 assists. He's a very good three-point shooter, 40% from 3 and 84.6% from the line. He can score at all 3 levels, the three-point range, the mid-range, the basket, like going to the basket, finishing. He also is a good post-up player. You can post him up on little guards. He's very good and efficient around that. He's strong. Like, he's not crazy quick. I mean, he's very mobile and athletic for a guy his size, but compared to a lot of the guards he goes against, he's not necessarily quicker than them, but he's smart. He understands where to get to his spots. He understands what he needs to do to be effective. He understands where he's effective from, and he's able to get to his spots. It reminds me a little bit of Luka Doncic in that way. I'm not saying he at all is Luka Doncic, but I'm saying he has a little bit of that same kind of characteristic in terms of being able to get to his spots, play with his own pace and own patience. And I think that really does bode well for him as he continues to move forward. But that's where I ultimately go with him. And I think, look at him too. He's had huge performances in games this year, right? 40 points at Oklahoma. He had 25 points in the Big 12 semifinal win against Baylor. He had 29 points in the Big 12 championship against Texas. He didn't play great in the NCAA tournament, though. But again, he was getting double-teamed a lot. But that will be a knock on him as he goes into the draft. He didn't play great in his first 2 games. He's a pretty good defender, though. Like, he has he's not as good maybe as Mobley or Mitchell, but he's a good defender. He's solid. He's a smart defender. He anticipates things pretty well, and he takes a challenge defensively. And I think his intelligence is what helps him on that side of the end. But I think his issues personally for me is that he wasn't super efficient from the floor. He was like 44% from the floor. That could be a little bit better. He was getting double teamed a lot when they played against certain teams, but I think he could be a little bit more efficient. I think the bigger thing with Tim too is that he needs to be more assertive and control his turnovers. So he has a negative assist to turnover ratio, which isn't really that great, but he had the ball in his hands a lot and he was getting double teamed a lot of the time too in the Big 12, and defense were attracting attention. At the next level, he's got to get a little bit better at that. And then at times, including the NCAA tournament, he wouldn't always stay as sort of in attack mode all the time, right? That's a little bit of a difference between him and the guy I'll have at number 1. But the reason I have him over Jalen Green is because he has the ability to score at all 3 levels very efficiently. He has multiple moves, and he's not just a straight line driver, and he can play at his own pace. I think the fact is he is a better passer than Jalen Green. He's a better playmaker, so I think you can plug him in and he can get guys better. Jalen Green, I think, is more of a scorer, but I think that Cade Cunningham's size also bodes well for him more on the offensive end. So that's why I have him at number 2. At number 1, I have Jalen Suggs, the Gonzaga point guard who had an incredible freshman year, leading this team to the national championship where they ultimately lost to Baylor. And when I look at him, I think a few things, right? 14.4 points a game, 5.3 rebounds, 4.5 assists. Gonzaga, the most efficient offense in college basketball. They were 31-1. He shoots 50% from the floor, 76% from the line. So, he's only 33% from 3, which is going to be an issue with him. But he's efficient at score. He's a very smart player. He knows how to control his pace really well. I think the big thing with him that separates him from a lot of guys is the fact that he always is assertive. He always plays with the chip on his shoulder. I think the fact that he can get guys better. He's a great defender. You can run the offense through him, but he's also a willing scorer as well. He's playing with guys like Drew Timme, Corey Kispert, Joel Ayayi, and Andrew Nembhard. I mean, they had a really talented team, and he still put up these good stats. I think also the fact that he averaged 2.9 turnovers, which again, sometimes he has a tendency to be a little out of control. But I think the fact is, compared to a guy like Cunningham, he's better at controlling the ball than a guy like Cunningham. I think also the fact is his mentality, right? He has a mentality of just, being assertive and dominating you every time in different ways, right? He wants to play at a fast pace. He can play at a slow pace. I think in today's NBA, he can, really ignite, breaks for teams. He can run a fast-paced offense, but he also can slow the ball down and run, more efficient offense if need be too. So I think that when I look at all this stuff, I think that he's definitely the number one draft pick because, he had games where he had, that crazy game winner against UCLA, one of the greatest game winners we'll ever see. And then, he had 24 against Kansas to start the season. He even had 22 in their national championship loss to Baylor. I mean, he was like the only good player that played well in that game. So he's a guy that's also very physical defensively. He's very athletic. He, takes the challenge. He gets into guys. He gets a lot of steals, by anticipation. And he also has a really good handle. Like, he can break guys down off the dribble, and he's really smart, finds shooters, understands offenses, defenses really well, especially as a freshman. It's incredible how well his IQ is. And the fact is, the really only issue I have with him is just, he needs to be a little bit more consistent as a three-point shooter, but that was also poor shot selection, then just being out of control. But I think he's the number one draft prospect because of just all the incredible things he brings to the table, the intangibles, the clutch gene, everything like that. So I think that, well, not say clutch gene, I think that's that wrong base, but I think that the clutch moments he had this year, and the fact that he's assertive, and the fact that he can run an efficient offense, especially in today's NBA, that's so attractive to look at. So that he's my number one draft prospect for sure. And then that's why I think, based on everything, that's why he's better than a guy like Cade Cunningham because of his assertiveness. He's a little bit better in terms of keeping the ball in control. And I think he does all the other intangibles a little better than Cunningham does at this period of time. So that's where I go with it. So again, it's Suggs, Cunningham, Jalen Green, Mobley, and Davion Mitchell are my top 5 prospects in the draft. Thank you for tuning in to the show today. Please like and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Subscribe to us on the different platforms you listen to podcasts. Really would appreciate that. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am Michael Schroeder.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.